Take a good look at this quiet farmland. You'd never guess what happened here, not until you hear the full story. Because this is not just soil. This is the battlefield where one black farmer stood up against a whole gang, and they didn't see it coming. But before we dive into this jaw-dropping tale, let me know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories like this. This isn't just about race, it's about land, legacy, and justice. He farmed in silence, respected everyone, until one hateful act lit a fire he didn't start, but one he was more than ready to finish. Now let's begin the story of Obadiah Cole, the farmer they underestimated, the man they'll never forget. In the quiet town of Briar Ridge, Mississippi, the roads were mostly gravel, the homes stood with weather-beaten pride, and respect was something you earned, not handed out. It was the kind of town where people kept to their own, where folks whispered more than they talked, and tucked away near the forest edge was Riverbend Acres, 60 acres of green pride, clean soil, and legacy, owned by a man named Obadiah Cole. He wasn't loud, he wasn't political, and he didn't owe anybody anything, just an old black man in his mid-50s, tall as a pine, hands calloused from work, and eyes that had seen more than he ever said. They called him Farmer Cole, and when you passed by his land, you'd see rows of okra, corn, and soybeans, and hear gospel music humming from the open barn. But lately, Obadiah had noticed changes. His fences were getting cut at night, tools disappeared from the shed, and just 2 weeks ago, his prized bull, King Moses, was found dead, slashed, left in the rain. He'd buried the animal himself, no police in sight. He knew why. The local force? All white, all connected. Sheriff Griggs used to drink beer with Roy Canning, the man who stood at the center of the real problem. Roy and his cousins made up the North Line Riders, a name that sounded like a country music band but meant nothing sweet. They were a gang, disguised as old-timers. They rode lifted trucks instead of horses, and wore skull rings instead of cowboy hats. The town turned a blind eye because their daddies once ran the cotton mills. But Cole wasn't from their side of history, and he never bowed. Roy wanted Riverbend, said it'd be perfect for a new duck hunting camp and gun club. Obadiah said no. Firm, quiet, unapologetic, and that refusal sparked a fire the gang never expected to burn out of control. Friday evening came with a red sky. Obadiah stood on his front porch, sipping spiced tea, watching the road. He didn't jump when he saw 3 trucks cruise past slowly. No plates, high beams on, just like they'd done all week. He placed his glass down, walked to the door and locked it with a twist. Then he opened a small wooden chest under the floorboards. Inside was a weathered military duffel. Most folks didn't know that before Obadiah planted seeds, he carried steel, 2 tours in Desert Storm, a squad leader in reconnaissance, expert in terrain tactics. The man wasn't just a farmer. He was a strategist who learned to read footprints the way others read books. He unzipped the bag and pulled out a thick black vest, dusty but intact. His old service patch, Cole, was still stitched on the front. Next came a rolled-up cloth, which opened to reveal 6 metal tools, 2 knives, a tracking scope, a rope bundle, a field map, and a Colt .45 with notches on the grip. He checked the ammunition, full. He didn't want trouble, but trouble had stepped across the line. Later that night, 3 men approached his field from the back trail. Roy, Dusty Brent, and Levi Mott, all part of the Riders. They laughed, tossed empty cans, and wore masks made from old t-shirts. "This is gonna teach him," Roy whispered. "Burn the feed barn, spook him good." They didn't know Obadiah had strung wire through the trees, triple arms hidden in birdhouses and tin cans. They didn't hear the low click as they passed the scarecrow, but Obadiah heard it from his front room. He rose, grabbed the duffel, slipped into the backfield like a shadow. The moon caught the edge of his blade as he circled wide through the bush line. He didn't shout, he didn't warn. He waited, watching the fools spill gas over the wooden structure he'd built with his own hands. Then, just as Levi flicked the match, a flashbang ignited beneath their boots. Not a military-grade one, a homemade version Cole designed from old fireworks, pepper dust, and crushed glass. Boom! Dusty screamed and fell backward into the feed trough. Roy stumbled, wiping his eyes, ears ringing, and then a voice came through the smoke. Low, calm, firm. "You trespassed once. This is twice. 3rd time I bury you." Roy froze. "Cole?" Obadiah stepped into view, shotgun in hand. "I told y'all, this land don't fold, and I don't beg." He fired into the air, not to kill but to declare. Levi ran. Dusty limped after him. Roy backed up, panting. Obadiah stood still, Go tell whoever sent you, next time I won't be aiming skyward. Roy spat on the ground. You gonna regret this, you old. Boom. Obadiah shot out the left headlight of Roy's truck. You were saying. Roy scrambled in, turned the ignition, and peeled off into the night, tires spitting gravel like spit. Obadiah watched the road clear. Then he turned, reset the traps, and walked inside like nothing happened. But he knew what he did wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Some people mistake peace for weakness. They confuse quiet with fear. But what they didn't know, what Roy's whole gang didn't see coming, was that this wasn't just a farm. It was a fortress, and Farmer Cole wasn't fighting for land. He was fighting for legacy. And now, by Monday, the whole town had heard what happened out at Riverbend. The riders came down on Farmer Cole's land like a pack of wild dogs and limped back like whimpering pups. Nobody said it out loud in Briar Ridge, but the looks in the feed store told the story. Heads turned when Obadiah walked in, some out of fear, others out of respect, and a few, like the banker and the sheriff, out of shame. Sheriff Griggs tried to play neutral, but his blood was tied to Chet Dansby. They'd grown up drinking from the same rusty water tank behind the baseball field. He knew what the riders had done. And worse, he knew what they planned next. But he did nothing. He sat behind his desk sipping sweet tea, staring at his phone, praying Obadiah would do something reckless first. That would make things easier. But Obadiah wasn't reckless. He was precise. Back on the farm, Obadiah didn't rest. He reinforced the western perimeter with motion-sensitive lights, salvaged from an old hunting lodge. He dug a second trench near the irrigation line and planted metal caltrops under the soil, small spikes made from bent rebar and rusted nails. He wasn't hoping for peace. He was preparing for siege. At night, he monitored the field with 2 game cameras strapped to tall poles, connected to a dusty laptop he kept under the table. And what he saw proved what he feared. They were watching him. Every night, trucks sat at the ridgeline, just beyond the main tree break. No plates, no lights, just shadows of people pointing, measuring, sometimes shooting into the air to stir him. They wanted a reaction. They wanted fear. But all they got was silence. In a town bar that reeked of beer, sweat, and diesel, Roy slammed his bottle down hard enough to make the counter shake. He humiliated us, he growled. One man. Made us look like fools. Because we came at him like amateurs. Chet spat back. His eye was purpled, and he still had a bandage around his elbow. We need to hit him hard. Take the house. Burn the damn place to the ground. Levi shook his head. We tried. We lost. Maybe it's time we step back. Roy turned slowly. You scared? No. I'm smart. You start a war with a man like Cole, and you best be ready to lose more than pride. Bojo slammed his hand on the table. Screw pride. We gotta remind people who runs Briar Ridge. Chet leaned in. Then we take what matters. Not just land. His roots. Burn his crops. Cut off his water. He's just a farmer, right? Let's make the ground bleed. Roy grinned, but there was a new flicker behind his eyes. Not confidence. Desperation. Then we hit him where it hurts. That night, Obadiah was patrolling the back pasture with a lantern, and his Remington slung across his chest when the east field lit up like lightning. Flames. The corn rose, tall, thick, and healthy, now swallowed in a wave of fire. He dropped the lantern, sprinted toward the blaze, heart pounding. The wind carried smoke across the pond, masking the stars, swallowing the land he had spent years building row by row. By the time he got there, the fire had spread halfway to the coop. No sign of the attackers, just a scorched field and tire marks leading back to the road. Obadiah grabbed the water pump, unrolled the hoses, and fought the blaze till sunrise, arms aching, lungs burning, clothes soaked in ash. By morning, 20 acres were gone. Gone. A season's worth of planting, work, faith, blackened by cowardice. He didn't cry, didn't rage, but in his silence was a storm. Across town, Roy sipped coffee with trembling hands. It's done, he said to his gang. We break him yet? Asked Dusty. Roy lit a cigarette. We will. He won't survive another week. But he didn't notice the man sitting in the corner booth, a stranger in a denim jacket, sunglasses and boots too polished for a mechanic. Langston Cruz, Obadiah's old squad mate. Reconnaissance, tactical surveillance, now freelance private security. He stirred his tea and recorded every word. Then he texted, Cole, they're desperate. They're slipping. You good? Obadiah replied, I'm still standing. Bring the gear. That evening, while smoke still hovered over the field, Obadiah knelt in the soil. He placed his hand on the blackened dirt and whispered, You lived well and you'll rise again. Then he rose, walked into the cellar, unlatched the second locker, and pulled out the box with the name Operation Backline written in faded paint. Inside was a radio set, flare markers, 2 trail charges, and a small satellite modem. He spent the next 2 hours wiring the creek bank with signal trip alarms, and dug in decoys made of scarecrow jackets stuffed with barbed wire. This wasn't farming anymore, this was control, and while they were busy watching him, Obadiah had already turned the land itself into a weapon. The next 2 nights passed with no movement. The trucks didn't show, no fires, no taunts, just quiet. Too quiet, and that's when he knew. They were waiting, not for him, but for something bigger. Thursday rolled in with clouds thick like wet wool. Rain misted down gently over the burned field, whispering over ash and silence. Obadiah Cole stood at the edge of the damage, arms folded, eyes cold, but his heart calm, calculating. Every inch of this land, every rise and fall of the soil, was his. It knew him, and now it would help him finish what they started. From the ridge came the distant rumble of engines, not 2, not 3, 7 trucks. The riders had returned, but this time they brought more than numbers. They brought revenge. Roy stood at the front, rain dripping down the bill of his camo cap, staring through binoculars. Behind him, Chet paced with an AR-15 in his hands, tapping it like a drum. Levi was silent. The rest, Dusty, Bojo, Clint, and the new recruits hung back, all itching for action. Roy lowered the binoculars. He's not out there. Maybe he ran, Bojo said. No, Roy said. He's here, somewhere. Chet spat. Then we flush him out. With that, the trucks rolled through the outer field, tearing into the wet ground, splitting tire marks into the earth like scars. They scattered in formation. 2 trucks to the barn, 2 toward the house, and 1 cutting across the pasture with a heavy chain dragging from the hitch. Obadiah saw everything, from the old deer blind he'd set up years ago in a tree above the western hedgerow. He didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out a small handheld trigger and waited. The moment Bojo stepped over the wire near the south gate, boom, a controlled blast erupted, sending dirt flying and scaring the chickens into a frenzy. Not lethal, just loud, disorienting. Roy screamed, "Move in, find him." They scattered. Chet kicked in the barn door, and was greeted by a wall of smoke from the sulfur barrels Obadiah had set on a delayed fuse. His eyes burned instantly. Levi led his pair toward the porch, but they didn't see the fishing line rigged across the steps, which triggered a metal rake flung by a spring trap straight into Dusty's knee. He howled and fell. Chet stumbled out of the barn cursing. They trapped the whole damn place. Roy spun, aiming his rifle at the porch. Enough, burn it all down. That was the cue Obadiah had been waiting for. He pressed the second button. Boom. Behind the pasture, a flare lit the sky, crimson, sharp, and crackling. It illuminated the trees, the shed, the stream, and Langston Cruz stepped out from the tree line, dressed in dark tactical gear, face painted in mud. Behind him, 2 more ex-military buddies, silent, armed, and calm. Chet turned and froze. Who the hell? Langston raised a paintball gun modified with pepper spray canisters and fired. Thwack! Direct hit to Chet's chest. He dropped his rifle, coughing violently, gasping for air. The riders panicked. They've got backup. Bojo tried to run toward the trucks, only to be clotheslined by a tension wire Obadiah had strung at thigh level between 2 cedar poles. Clint swung wildly into the fog with a bat. Missed. The men began yelling in all directions, half blind, half dazed, fully out of their depth. Obadiah finally stepped out of the shadows. He didn't wear camo. He didn't carry a rifle, just a vest, a radio, and authority. "Y'all came to my land with violence," he shouted calmly, his voice rising through the rain. "You came with numbers, thinking numbers mean power." Roy spun to face him, eyes wide, rage boiling. "You think this is over?" Obadiah shook his head. "No, Roy. You think this is war? But I've seen war. And this is just cleanup." Roy raised his weapon. Crack! A warning shot fired from Langston clipped the barrel from the side, sending it spinning into the mud. "Make another move," Langston said coldly, stepping into full view, "and we'll see how long it takes for the sheriff to show up now that the cameras are rolling." Because what Roy didn't know, the moment they crossed the wire, they entered a recorded perimeter. Multiple trail cams, GoPros hidden in hollow fence posts, audio mics planted in tree branches. Everything was being streamed live to 3 sources: a private cloud server, the sheriff's office, and the local black church whose pastor had long suspected something was brewing. Roy's breath caught. He looked around. His men were down, gasping, broken, confused. "Call the sheriff," he muttered. Obadiah held up his phone. "Already did. But this time, I didn't call his office. I called his boss." From behind, red and blue lights suddenly flashed on the ridge. Not a local cruiser. 2 state troopers emerged, guns raised, hands in the air. The riders froze, Roy's legs buckled. For the first time, the gang saw what real strength looked like, and it didn't wear hate or hide behind badges. It wore boots caked with soil, hands calloused from planting, and eyes that had stared down death long before Briar Ridge ever spat its first threat. One by one, they dropped their weapons. Langston cuffed Chet with zip ties. Obadiah just watched, quiet, controlled like a man pruning weeds he never asked for. And still, he didn't smile. Because this wasn't a win. Not yet. There was still one more piece left, Roy Canning, and Obadiah wasn't finished with him. The storm passed, but the fire in Obadiah's soul had only begun to smolder. Briar Ridge woke up to a new kind of silence, the kind that came after war. Smoke still curled from the scorched earth, and the local news vans now surrounded the Cole farm like it was holy ground. But there was still unfinished business. Roy Canning was in county holding, waiting for his lawyer. And Obadiah, he wasn't done yet. Sheriff Griggs showed up late that morning, hat in hand, sweating. He didn't bother pretending he wasn't ashamed. Not after footage of his inaction hit the news. Not after Reverend Paul broadcasted the entire siege during Sunday's service. Obadiah didn't greet him at the gate. He stood under the shed, hammering new beams to replace the ones scorched during the attack. Griggs approached like a man walking to his own trial. "You set them up," he said finally. "No," Obadiah replied, never breaking pace. "I prepared. There's a difference. They're calling you a militant, a threat." Obadiah turned slowly, eyes fixed on the man who'd ignored every warning sign for years. "I'm a farmer, Sheriff. I grow things. But when you step on my land, burn my crops, and come with war, don't be surprised when I don't plant peace." Griggs nodded, ashamed. The state's taking over the investigation. They should have taken over a long time ago. Obadiah stepped forward, measuring every word like seed in a row. "But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for something bigger." Griggs squinted. "Bigger?" Obadiah handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, a signed petition with over 3,000 names. Names of every black and brown farmer, every immigrant worker, every marginalized landowner within 5 counties. The demand? Federal protection under hate crime statutes, land preservation rights, and the immediate arrest of all riders, including Sheriff Griggs's own deputies who were named in the footage. Griggs swallowed hard. "You're going national with this." Obadiah nodded once. "It's no longer just about me. It's about every man who tills this land with love and gets spit on for the color of his skin." That evening, Obadiah made his way into town. Not to the church, not to the school, to the Veterans Hall. Inside, over 200 men and women sat waiting. Some had served in Korea, others in Afghanistan. Some old, some young, all scarred. Obadiah stood before them and said, "They thought I was alone." Silence. He held up a photo of his grandfather, a World War II vet who returned home only to be denied a loan for land he'd bled for. "They thought I was just a farmer." He pointed to the crowd. "But every seed I plant carries your stories. Every root is soaked in history." He paused, then said slowly, "We're not just survivors. We are protectors of land, of legacy, of each other." And the hall erupted in applause, because what Obadiah Cole did was more than defend a farm. He sparked a movement, a storm. Back at the jail, Roy Canning stared at the concrete wall. The news played behind him, muted, showing clips of his arrest, his face bruised and humiliated, while the words "domestic terror charges" scrolled across the screen. His lawyer leaned in. "You're the face of a hate crime now." Roy chuckled bitterly. "You think they'll put me away for long?" The lawyer shook his head. "No, Roy. I think they'll bury you in lawsuits, federal audits, and public disgrace. You're already done." As he left, Roy muttered, "This ain't over." But deep down, he knew it was, because his power came from fear, and fear doesn't stand when the truth rises. Weeks later, Obadiah walked through his newly planted field, rows of fresh seedlings poking through the ash. Langston walked beside him, whistling low. "You really gonna testify before Congress?" Obadiah smiled faintly. "Only if they serve good cornbread." They laughed. In the distance, kids played by the creek again. Life had returned, but nothing was the same. Because when you face a gang with nothing but faith, wisdom, and the land under your boots and win, you don't just restore your name. You become legend. Obadiah Cole wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was the man who stood when no one else would. And Briar Ridge, it would never forget his name.